How is everybody doing? And welcome back for another Strength Chat episode. Today, I have got a very special guest for you all. I actually heard this guy speak at the Kabuki Education Week, which is an absolutely awesome lecture, an awesome event as well. Today, I'm joined by a coach, an athlete, a mentor. Today, I'm joined by the one and only Nick Gloff. How are you doing?
That might be the nicest introduction I've ever gotten. Thank you.
No problem at all. How are you? What have you been up to? What's been happening in your world recently?
I'm good, man. I'm good. Really, for the most part, this year has been a big one for just business and building up what I'm doing with all of my own clients and really getting the roster put together, which has been really nice. I've been coaching for a few years now. It's been about four that I've been kind of in the public eye doing it. And so in the last year or so, gotten a lot of the guys that I've had developing over, marinating, just going from day one and picking up and just putting in the time, really showing their stuff, starting to get a couple people from that original roster that had no business being on a competitive stage, getting there this year and next year. It's going to be a really good time. And then picking up a little bit of steam everywhere else, putting out some more educational content than ever before. I've been a little bit quiet on Instagram and stuff like that, but that's if you're interested in hearing my thoughts on all that stuff, I have my own podcast, the Going Deeper podcast, Going Deep podcast. And so if you want to hear my chicanery over that, you can go listen to that and hear my thoughts. I won't go into it here. But on the other side of things, putting out things like lectures and presentations and all the things that are actually a little bit more valuable overall as long form content has been a little bit more of the focus of the last 2 years for me. And it's been pretty interesting, especially getting out there and bumping into some other people that are pretty good in that space, been doing it for a lot longer than me, learning new things, learning how to communicate at a little bit more practical level for a lot of people. It's been good.
Oh, cool. And
In my
how did you
world.
find? I know. Obviously, I mentioned the Kabuki Education Week. Like I say, I really enjoyed your lecture there. Well, I would call it seminar, but I always think a seminar should be in person.
Yeah.
How did you find that? How are you finding presenting and putting the content out there? Yeah, how did you find that?
I was really honored to be invited because it's a very everyone in strength and bodybuilding knows what Kabuki is. It's a huge company, huge business, represents a big proportion of the strength world. So, and there's a lot of people that I know personally that I've gone and done work with or talked with and been friends with that were presenting as well. So it was really cool to be included with everything. So that aside from everything else, performance of it all, honestly, I do prefer doing in-person seminars above anything else.
Yeah,
Really do. Yeah, because the presentation that you saw me give in that lecture is one that I had originally presented over a year ago in San Antonio doing a lecture series seminar with John Jewett and Luke Miller.
right.
So that in-person seminar, I put together the presentation, gave that, and it was a blast. And so that was the last time that I presented on that specific set of material. And doing the difference between that, having a full room of people and talking to people, seeing the facial expressions and being able to get like the eureka moments to pop. And if something's not landing, being able to shift and then give a little bit of a different approach to get things to actually go where they're supposed to go. That's definitely my preferred method.
Yeah, yeah,
The
definitely.
seeing nothing but black screen in my own presentation and just talking into the void is not my favorite thing. As you could probably tell while I was giving the presentation as well. Just
Yeah,
it's kind of monotonous. So I like the human interaction more than anything else with I'm a coach. I mean, obviously, that's like what we do. So the
yeah,
human interaction piece is the most important and impactful thing for my enjoyment and for the people that are actually consuming it as well. Because without that piece to it that you're actually connecting and you know that you can talk at just the right level is really important for you to get the actual meaning of it to be conveyed rather than just giving a whole bunch of information that's like, oh, that's cool to think about, but I don't know what's going to be done with it. And then just it goes in one ear, you're like, oh, that's cool. And then out the other, and you're like, what was that he was talking about? So Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely my preferred method is the in-person seminars, of which I've done a good handful of so far in the last 2 years. They've been a lot of fun. Each one of them I've done. I've had a lot of fun doing them, and I'm going to be doing some more in the future. Hopefully, traveling over to your neck of the woods here in the next year or so to
Ah,
go
cool.
over there. Yeah, yeah.
Nice. Because I know I always like to ask that question because I'm that person that'll be asking questions in a seminar. I'm like, oh, okay, I'm going to expand on it. That's why I enjoy doing the podcast. But yeah, apart from living on Pacific time for a week or so, trying to catch some of the lectures. I thought it was as a concept. I thought it was really good for people such as myself based over in the UK who maybe can't get to a lot of seminars with traveling and those sorts of things. Yeah, it was really good, and like I say, I really appreciate you taking time to jump on. Following on from seeing that lecture. I did kind of a brief introduction, but for everyone listening who might not know your background in training, in coaching, just want to give a little bit of a background to yourself.
Uh, sure. Sure. I can give a little bit of a background. I can start with just the credential type stuff first, because that's the boring part. Went to school for exercise science and kinesiology, got a degree in both by the time that I was all finished with it. Studied biology as a minor as well during that time, but that's a little bit less relevant. Aside from a little bit more of the deeper things that I got into with the exercise science degree that inform me in ways that help me otherwise in coaching. So things like cardiac rehab and specific physiology courses that help to fill in some gaps that you wouldn't really even get from other certification courses or things relevant to what we do as strength or bodybuilding coaches. And so that was my formal education to start with. During that time, also, I worked in a biomechanics lab for a few years. I worked on EMG research in tandem with some isokinetic dynamometry for just rate of force production work, which was interesting. I wasn't the pioneer of that process. That was long being instantiated before I was there by the research professor that I was working under. And so that man was a genius. I owe a lot to that guy. His name was Dr. Williams. He's a good man. Yep. I hope someday I get to talk to that man again. But in any case, so that's really the formal education. And then to follow up after that, certifications with Prescript. I've also given a seminar talk alongside a Prescript last year, doing a lower body intensive where Luke Miller and I helped them out a little bit with the seminar portion, speaking portion, and a little bit on the floor work. Taking the PSL1, PSL2, skill acquisition as well. CCU as well, which is Coach's Corner University, that is done by Paul O'Need and Tony Montgomery Jr., of which unfortunately I've never presented alongside Paul, although Paul did have a spot, I believe, at Kabuki this year. And then Tony, I have presented along with down in Tampa as well, which is also a very nice guy. He's a little bit more quiet than even I am on social media these days, but he's a very good dude, very smart dude, and they put up a very good education. So if anyone's looking for certification courses to go and do, I would definitely start, especially more in your realm, strength world. I would definitely go and look at the CCU with those two. It's very comprehensive. It does a very good job of giving you the tools and the skill set that you need to just put steps forward. And I've also been roughly mentored a little bit by some physical therapists that I know in the local area around me, one of which, shout out to the best PT that I've ever known. It's Dr. Christiana Marin, who's a great inspiration that works out of Fort Lauderdale here in Florida. Then handful of other people and honorable mentions that have helped guide the process for me along the way, that have added little bits and pieces into the process to get me to where I am now in the thought process that I currently hold. And so I could probably leave it about there for all that stuff, or else I'll talk for a lot longer. I probably don't need to. Aside from that, I've been coaching since I was in college and getting my degrees. So I started off very small time at that point, just helping out a couple of friends. Actually started less coaching and more mentorship at that point in time, where I had a couple of people living with me that I was handling all of their processes from start to finish. So it was more like a bodybuilding boot camp that they lived with me for, which was a good time. It gave me my start with really learning how to cover the entire process from every single lifestyle pattern down to the way that you execute your preparation for training, the way that training has to run, the way that you have to stack all of the events of your day to make sure that that works properly, the mentality of it, being able to watch people do that and go through the ebbs and flows of a normal emotional and hormonal cycle throughout the day or weeks, months.
Yeah.
And just putting all those little unseen pieces that most people don't actually end up getting to see with their own athletes unless they're very tied into doing it themselves or lived in a team athlete environment formally for a long period of time and were very observant of what was happening while they were there. And so that gave me my start. And then immediately after that, started working and doing coaching with some other coaching teams, one of which was Cover Model Academy with Chris Spearman for a little while. And then after that, shortly after, I started working as a sub coach on Team Camp Jansen, of which I had left a little over a year and a half ago and still in the same area, still doing all the same things, just doing it independent and making my own way. So that's pretty much where I'm at. I've got quite a few competitors that have made it to stage in the last 2 years and a lot more that are coming this year. And I'll leave it at that because they will prove themselves just all on their own.
Yeah. Oh, cool. Quite a obviously I know you went through the education side of things there, but quite a few strings to your bow, if you like. And one thing, and diving into sort of the topics, if you like, when you mentioned there about the journey from start to finish in coaching, and that coach's eye, if you like, being able to pick up on things. And the main thing that I wanted to talk about today was the hypertrophy and muscle building side of things. And maybe as starting from top down, if you like, the question is, time frames and expectations in terms of, what can be achieved in terms of building muscle, body composition, and all those sorts of things. Can you just sort of explain, what that means, and kind of what have you found from your experience? What is realistic? What time frames can people work with from your experience?
The best way to go about it, especially on the side of being a coach and somebody that puts out information to guide people, is to make generalizations with some depends statements put along the way. So there's going to be some people that are going to be just absolute freaks of nature, and there's nothing that we can say that can really capture what they're capable of doing. And so that's just a whole category of their own. But talking towards those people does nothing because they're not even listening to us. They don't care to hear what we have to say because they're out there doing it at a level that we can't even understand because that's just what they do because they exist that way. But the general person is on the other end of the curve where that little extreme on the one side of the bell kind of is oblivious to everything else because they just do the thing and do it so successfully they don't need to keep their ear to the ground. But then everyone else, from doing fairly well and being genetically able for whatever reasons and all the factors that go into that, have the ability to progress fairly well to much less well, the whole spectrum of them, and then down to people that would be nearly considered to be non-responders, even though that's not a real thing technically. People that have just an absolutely horrific time making anything in the way of progress that would be seen from the outside looking in as something substantial. And so talking towards those types of people in that part of the bell curve, timelines have to be based off of exactly what you've been able to exhibit in the past. And if they're total beginners, it's always best to give some optimism. It's like, listen, like the gap between where most people sit in the world and then where people within our spaces in the bodybuilding, powerlifting, strength training, all the rest of this, and fitness world itself, the separation between people that we don't see once you're deep far enough into it is that there's actually a theory barrier between people in the general world that really believe that you can't actually make a change to the way your body looks and feels. Like they genuinely don't believe it. If you talk to Susie, 55 years old, with 4 kids at the supermarket and ask her if it's really possible for her to get into better shape or get stronger, she'd probably tell you absolutely not. Yeah. Like 9 times out of 10. But then same person, same scenario, could be in the best shape of their life at that point if they decided that that was possible to be done. And so having that optimism to tell anyone at any point that, you know what, you can improve. You can be infinitely better than what you imagine you can be from this point to whatever point in the future that you want to look at, so long as the process is something that you ingrain into your normal everyday life and you enjoy.
Yeah.
That's usually the best way to go about it. And I tend to do this even with my own clients to a degree, where I get asked a lot, and every coach does, for a concrete timeline on things like this. It's like, well, how many months or how many years, or in 6 months from now, how many pounds of muscle tissue can I put on? What should I expect my weight to be? It's like, well, think about it from the coach's side. What if you are on the closer end of the bell curve to somebody that responds extremely well? What might that look like? If we expect that I'm giving a recommendation as if you're on another end of the curve, we may be way undercutting what you're possible to do. Your potential may be way above that, and we'll be adhering to the kind of timelines and the changes and adjustments that would lead you to being lesser than what you could have been, because we thought that you weren't capable of doing that. And that happens actually to a lot of people, because there's this rash of research within bodybuilding or physiology generally and exercise science that says that you can only put on such a measly amount of muscle tissue per year, discouraged like an entire generation of people that are deeply into the science. Like, seriously, like the people that came up and got like more presently aware of the research base within exercise science in the last, like, I don't know, I'd probably give it the last like 6 to 8 years. This group of people that really got into it at that point in time got very caught in the trenches with like, oh, it's possible maybe to put on a half a pound or a pound of muscle tissue per year. It's like, I don't believe that for a second, first of all, because I've seen that be disputed and proved wrong by many of people, not of which are on PEDs to do so. Natural athletes that are able to do it, and not the ones that you look at and you think, well, they're definitely on something. It's like the people that look like that and are natural, they've got a little bit extra, and that's just genetics. The people that don't look like that, but they can continue to make that kind of progress year over year, those people are doing more than half a pound or a pound of muscle tissue per year. And they're advanced enough to be slowed down. So thinking that we're limited within that very small range of what you can do is only limiting people. It doesn't give you anything productive to do.
Yeah. I think that's how you explain there, because it's exactly right. People always want, how much, give me a number of how much, and give me an absolute time frame. Whereas I think that's a good way of reframing it and thinking it with that, because as you were saying that, I think sometimes, I can't remember what the phrase is, but as coaches, people can always sometimes the client can see all of the negative things, what's holding them back, whereas a coach is always going to see their potential. But then equally, I liked what you said there about actually, if we give time frames, you could be holding somebody back who could be progressing more, which I think is I thought that was really good. In terms of you've spoken there about putting having that optimism, thinking about that positivity around it. How much influence as well? Because you spoke there before about being able to spot things that might be missed, about all the variables outside of the gym as well. And I know we'll touch on sort of training in the gym, but how much sort of influence and again from your experience, changes or adjustments with things outside of the gym, so recovery, nutrition, stress, all those other things that sometimes people can neglect, or they take maybe a little bit longer to focus on and improve, if that makes sense.
So the impact of everything else that you do outside of the gym is massive. Sometimes, and for usually a short period of time at the very least, and I'd say a short period of time being in more beginner stage windows. So the first maybe year to maybe a little over that, you can get away with messing some things up pretty royally outside of the gym, and it won't quite catch up to you until that 2.5, 3 year mark where you're getting serious and things are going to have to start progressing in more than just one way. You can't just put in more effort on the gym floor and have things continue to pan out. Up until that point, you can pretty much just do that. You can just get more intense, do a little bit more work, find where your actual capacity to push yourself is. And throughout that period of time, you're probably going to be able to recover enough that you can continue to progress. But at some point, you continue through doing that another year, 2 years, 3 years, the wheels are going to fall off. And they're going to come off not all at once, usually. It's usually just a little thing here, a little thing there. It's like not doing proper maintenance on your car.
Yeah.
So if you were to do just the little things here and there, do it semi regularly, you'll probably have it run just right for a pretty long time, aside from just some rash accidents that may happen out of nowhere.
Yeah.
That happens with people too. You don't take care of those things. You take care of those things over the long haul, you're going to be pretty good for the most part. You don't, you'll feel good until you don't, then it blows up. Just like a car. It's not going to work very well if you neglect things outside, because what are we doing in the gym? It's inducing a stressor. You can handle those stressors for a pretty good long time up until you can't. And if you're not handling all the things that allow you to handle those stressors, that limit is going to hit you much faster and much harder once you get to it. And so taking care of those little things like sleep, I'll say this and I'll cut off, is that things like sleep, probably the biggest one that most people miss the majority of the time, especially younger people. Sleep is massive. It's probably the most important thing aside from food that people don't do right. So then there's sleep. Then most people also screw up food. So that's a problem as well. And usually that's an inconsistency issue on both ends. It's not being able to get into a consistent routine that your circadian rhythm actually wants to be on. You may have a consistent routine that is not on your circadian rhythm that it wants to be on, and then that causes its own issues. That causes knock-on issues to your hydration levels, your mental state, your ability to actually recover from your training, whether or not you feel okay enough to continue going, and you patch it over with stimulants, this, that, the other. Then your food is inconsistent because your hunger signals aren't proper. So they're not coming at the right times, because when you are hungry and not hungry is directly tied into your circadian rhythm as well. So it's a domino effect from that point where everything starts to just get thrown off. And that one inconsistency can cause inconsistencies in everything else that constitutes your lifestyle outside of the gym. So it creates a full domino effect where everything just falls over. Yeah. And eventually the training efforts can't be kept up anymore. And then you just try and keep on patching that over with just white knuckling. And the white knuckles don't hold out forever.
Yeah. You kind of as you were thinking that, you kind of read my mind a little bit as a follow-up question from there, because it's that thing of there's a tendency for a lot of people, a lot of clients, to want like definite answers, and sometimes it's that age-old thing of it depends. But you explained it well there, of everything has a knock-on effect on everything else. And kind of some people say, all right, well, I'm going to focus on my sleep right now. I'm going to focus on my nutrition right now. And sometimes we can focus on things individually, which isn't necessarily a bad thing all the time. But what's kind of because we've in terms of the training program, right? This is the structure. This is what we're going to do. We can make tweaks as we go if needed. But in terms of the things outside of the gym, what is kind of your approach to when you're working with your clients, your athletes, to kind of tackle all those things? Because sometimes, it can be a little bit overwhelming to be like, well, how do I sort my sleep out? How do I do that? Because, I like what you said, it influences everything. What's kind of your approach, and what success have you had with that?
So it's always about asking the questions. So you have to get the feedback first and have a structure as a coach to be able to get the feedback that allows you to ask the right questions. So always having something that's tracking the time that they're actually going to bed and waking up, their subjective quality of sleep, and then maybe whatever tracking device that they may have, having that for corroborating data, what they're feeling like when they wake up and how they're going throughout their day, what their energy is like when they get into the gym, what their actual performance is like in the gym, how well they can actually fall asleep at night, and whether they're restless or anxious or just unable to fall asleep with their eyes closed laying in bed. Asking questions like that at least give you the lead in to know, okay, well, I'll give you a scenario here. So you have a person that has most things are looking pretty good most of the time, right? But they are restless when they go to bed. They can close their eyes, but they lay there for 2 hours and they can't fall asleep. Okay. So from that alone, and you can see that from the feedback you get, what time did you go to bed? How many actual hours of sleep did you get? You see a discrepancy there. It's okay, there's a question. You went to bed and you were going to have 9 hours of sleep, but you ended up with 6. What happened? Okay, well, you may have the answer of, oh, I had to get up to pee like 4 times. Okay, well, good to know. I wouldn't have known that if I didn't ask.
Yeah.
You may not have known if you're not experienced that that's not something that should be happening. Or if it is kind of supposed to be happening, is if you're like in a prep for bodybuilding and you're really lean, knowing that that's happening and at the certain point that it does come, knowing how to mitigate it, but also knowing that it's okay that that's happening because it's a natural response is an appropriate thing for a coach to be able to say. So, knowing the scenario, they may spend the last 2 hours before bed on their phone scrolling on Instagram or TikTok or something, or watching YouTube. And they just don't understand it. Or they're even worse, they're laying in their bed doing it.
Mm-hmm.
And they just think like, oh, it's just this is my wind down time. That's not winding you down. That is winding you up in more ways than just one. So asking that question where people aren't super deep into thinking about this, and this also happens with people that are smart enough and know enough that it is a problem and they're aware of it. But when things become an ingrained habit and a pattern in their daily life, they focus more on the comfort of that event happening within their daily routine as opposed to what negative effect it may be actually having on them. The negative effect then becomes more dissociated to the events that happened prior because they look at it as, okay, well, maybe this past is something I could do for a period of time. And now I have a problem. It doesn't seem like that's directly related, even though you can know all the mechanisms are in place to have that happen. You could have fallen asleep just fine, staring at your phone, scrolling on it for a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. And at some point, you just cannot sleep. And then you wake up restless. You wake up with bad dreams. You wake up in the morning and you have eye bags like crazy because you never actually got into deep sleep as you went to bed a little bit later than you were supposed to. And then the blue light stopped your melatonin release. So you didn't have the cascade of neurotransmitters to actually get you to fall asleep and stay asleep and get deep within it and have actual proper sleep and restful phases. Then you have some issues with clearing beta amyloid plaque in your brain. So your brain function doesn't work quite as well the next day. And all the rest of the stuff happens. It's just a domino. But people don't think that way once it becomes an ingrained habit. And so, reel it back, using that example, you have to be able to ask the question and have the structures to have the starting point to make the jump and make the questions happen so you can get the answer, so you can address it. And I don't tend to like going at it with my own people with a giant protocol change all at once. If I know they're capable, say if I'm looking at their feedback overall and my feedback, the way that I collect it is pretty comprehensive. It's roughly like 30 variables I'm looking at per day. Yeah. And so looking at all of that data, if I can see that they're pretty much like nailing it on a daily basis, aside from 1, 2, 3 things, then I just look at what might be the progenitor of the problem and attack that one only. So if they have a little bit of trouble with getting their meals in, so like say, I'll further the example using the same one. Somebody's in an off season, okay? And up to now, they haven't really had that much of a sleep problem. They're starting to report that they're not being able to fall asleep at night. They have that they're scrolling their phone, doing their thing, right? It's the same person. But up until this point, they had no problem being able to make progress in the gym. They were sleeping pretty well. Things were feeling pretty good. They could get all their meals in, no problem. It's digesting just fine. But now it's a problem. They're not hungry when their meal times pop up. When they eat their food, they're not digesting it very well. It's sitting in their stomach like a rock. Any increase in food or the foods that we had in their plan prior and have been for a good period of time and digesting well just don't sit the way they're supposed to anymore. And then by the end of the day, they can't put it all down because they're just by the last meal, they just cannot do it because it's been sitting in their stomach and rocking around where they're trying to go about their day. And then that makes them not able to fall asleep properly because having too much food in their stomach doesn't make for good sleep. So it becomes a compound effect. So what do? I don't look at it as, okay, well, you have a digestive issue. Here's a whole bunch of digestive supplements to fix that. I don't go, okay, we have a digestive issue. We have a sleep issue. We have you not hydrating properly issue. We have you not timing your training quite properly. Like, I'm not looking at all of those things at once. I'm seeing them, but then going, okay, well, think about it. If you actually got to sleep on time, it was properly done. You weren't staring at your phone. You had your blue light blockers on. You switched to only light sources in your house that are below eye level from the time the sun goes down. You're not working and engaging in actual active mental work in the hours prior to bed, at least 2. Do all those things and then see how all the rest of it changes. And usually it's like snap of the fingers, done. That gets done, that habit changes, the habit gets ingrained properly, and you don't have any of those problems again.
Yeah. I think from you said there, and it seems like a common theme that we've touched on, a domino effect. You kind of highlighted there how it can be a negative domino effect. It can lead through there, and it just comes down to a little bit of a tangent, but that's something that kind of I've tried to read up a little bit more on to help clients and athletes. That sleep hygiene of the going to bed and scrolling on your phone. Yes, you're in bed, but you're not actually sleeping, and then it has that domino effect. But then you've got the positive side of it, of then all of a sudden it becomes a successful habit. I think I read the book Atomic Habits. Have you read? Yeah.
I haven't read it actually.
Oh, okay. I would 100%. I would 100% recommend it. It's a good read, and I think it's by James Clear, and talks about sort of like habit stacking, about how you can eat that. It's that. Well, I always remember it as domino effect. That's why I remember that. But yeah, I think that's and you kind of hit the nail on the head there. People don't often think about that. They just think, well, yeah, I'm in bed, but the actual repercussions of that can be slightly different. One thing that you kind of touched on, and that it kind of flows nicely into what you mentioned in your lecture, the Kabuki week, was your thought process on an explanation around sort of like redlining, and sometimes when you're pushing too much. And I know we spoke about you spoke about that in terms of the training side of things, but then also sleep and recovery. How much of an impact does that have on that? Does maybe training have a bigger impact than everything outside of the gym, or can both sort of cause that that car crash analogy that you used?
Well, stress is stress, no matter what the source comes from. And so I would say overall, everything outside of the gym is more likely to lead you to a quote unquote red line situation than things in the gym.
Yeah.
But having all the other things outside of the gym that are going on, plus training, is generally what ends up pushing everything over the edge. So you could probably handle most of things if you were just going through normal life and it's stressful and you got this, that, the other that's pulling away from you, and you've got lifestyle habits that don't really serve you very well. Probably lasts a little bit longer before you're totally in burnout, minus strenuous training. You add the strenuous training on top of it, and you're trying to push yourself continuously, break new barriers, progress on strength, or trying to build tissue. Those demands are going to be pretty high. And so you add that over top of everything else when you're already pretty close to your limit, and you're just going to fly right over the top of it. You're going to be Icarus flying directly into the sun, not even just close enough to burn the wings. Like, you're just donezo. So that's usually what happens to people, is that most of the time, like, people, here's a good example, a little segue here, is that one of the things that creates the most successful and prolifically accoladed athletes that we have as bodybuilders or strength athletes is that they're just mentally rock solid. So the things outside of the gym just operate on autopilot. Like, they're unbreakable. So they might have things going on like everything else, like everyone does, but they're not going to get all stressed out about it. It's not going to really affect them. They're going to continue their normal everyday life as if things pretty much are going normally because they have good strategies for managing those life situations and stresses that come with it. Those people tend to do very well in sporting contexts because all of the rest of the things, even though they may be stressful, they are far less stressful to them than another person in the same exact circumstances that don't have the mental makeup to be able to handle them as matter of factly as those people do. That is a big difference between people. So the more heady type people have a much harder time avoiding red lines because every single other issue and stressor in their life is going to be amplified by the fact that they're thinking about those stressors and creating and catastrophizing bigger ones out of them, making mountains out of molehills more often than not. And so having those compounding into each other, then you add on the training stress, they're probably going to hit a red line. Person that doesn't do that is probably going to handle all of it all of the time, have really no issues, aside from the fact that they may be pushing on that side of training that much more continuously because they could usually tolerate it. And eventually they will have to pull it back because they'll hit a red line directly due to training because it creates a much larger proportion of the overall stress load.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
with that, sorry, when you just mentioned there, obviously, because somebody's 10 out of 10 stress might be somebody else's, 5 out of 10 stress. Everyone's going to be different with there. And one thing is that working hard within the limits, making sure that we're getting that training stimulus, that we're managing fatigue. How and I know you mentioned there, the 30 variables that you'd be looking at, and working with the athletes and clients. How do you know what those limits are? Are there any signs that you're thinking, right, okay, now we need to pull it back? Because sometimes it can be that case of and I think it's changing. I don't think it's like this. I don't think it's like this all the time because I think people are learning that they need to track everything else. Is that we'll just do more. We'll just push through it. We'll just keep working. Whereas actually sometimes, it's the I think this phrase is apt, but training a little bit smarter rather than just training harder all the time. How have you seen that? How have you worked with that?
Absolutely. So like some of the variables that you would want to look at to see whether people are still able to tolerate what they're doing, the easiest and biggest one that you can look at is usually just how much people are enjoying their training and whether or not they can show up and be happy to do so. Like that is the first one to start looking at because that's usually one of the signs that people like we do this because we like it. We enjoy doing this. For a lot of people, it's like it's the meme of this is our therapy type deal. Like for a lot of people, that's kind of what it is. And really, biologically, to a degree, it is. And actually, have some research to substantiate that we tend to get better results out of consistent, strenuous exercise than most antidepressant protocols.
Yeah.
So, given that, we already know that it's going to be something that helps people. But if it's doing the opposite effect, and you're walking in and you're just blah, or you just can't really get yourself to turn on, like here's one that I tend to ask quite a bit is when you turn on your music for training, do you even feel it? That is usually the aha. Because a lot of people will still just go through the motions and be like, you know what? Because we've had enough of these tropes go on for enough generations of strength sport and bodybuilding that you're not going to always want to show up and do it. So you just do it anyway. It's like, there's a good point to that. There is. But that's generally not good advice for people that are the overly obsessed types already, that treat it with that type of gravitas in the normal life, anyways. It's the people that are just getting into it that need that little bit of a kick because, they had a long day at work. They're doing an extra hour or two of overtime and they just don't want to go. They would rather just go home and crack a beer and sit on their couch. Like if that's like the actual alternative in their own mind, then yeah, hearing that you know what, you're not going to feel like it all the time, but you better go because that's what you should do. Those people, that's really useful. But the people that are actually fully dedicated to it, they don't need to hear that because they're going to do that and they're going to do it to their own detriment more often than they're not. And so knowing that if they start to think, because they'll show up anyways. Ask the question when you turn on your favorite music, that top set music that you need for you to just turn everything off. The world goes blank and it's just you and you doing your thing. If you turn that on and you feel nothing, you need to step back.
Yeah.
That is a real easy one. And most people connect with that one immediately because everyone has their music when they go and train. Everyone has their thing. They've got,
Absolutely.
I don't know. You got your favorite Katy Perry song, and as soon as you hear fireworks, you're just like, I'm ready. I'm
Yeah.
ready for my max effort deadlift set today
Yeah.
because I'm a firework. It's time to go. So if they
Yeah.
can't feel it, they're not feeling like a firework that day. You gotta pull. There's something wrong. And usually, if they have one of those things showing up, their general mood during their day isn't going to be very good. They're going to feel as though after their sessions, they feel so drained that their mental capacity isn't there. So if they have any sort of mentally draining tasks, like they have to work after training, if they work earlier in the morning, or if they have a very demanding on their time job, kind of like a coach, many coaches have that where they're working all day long and they just have little breaks in between for training and doing the things for themselves. Those types of people that just cannot perform in their normal tasks afterward because they just can't anymore because they had to push that much more resource into doing the training. That tells you something. If they're having those sleep issues while their sleep hygiene is totally on point, that'll tell you something. They're a bit overdriven and they just cannot get it to turn off. The sympathetic state just will not come back down to baseline. Problems like that start to show up. They start waking up and they just don't have it in them. They feel generally a little bit more disturbed mentally. They're just a little bit less, they're a little more moody.
Yeah.
They kind of blow off the handle a little bit extra from what they're normally characteristically able to do. Then, even if that's not the case, they're a little bit more flat to the world. They don't really want to engage in conversation if there's somebody that tends to like doing that with more people on a general basis. The number of interactions start to go down. How they interact with their coach starts to get a little bit toned down. They don't have as much to say. They don't have as much of an update for you. They don't send you as many of their video clips that they should be for their training. The training that you do get is kind of lackluster. It starts to really show a pattern where if you can put yourself into the shoes of somebody that's going through a hard time, whatever that hard time might be, you can have enough empathy to understand what that's going to feel like. You can see it almost immediately.
Yeah. I think the question that you said there about the music, I had an example of that. I had a competition. I think it was last year. It might be in the year before. And I know afterwards I was just kind of like, yeah, no, this isn't right. And then take a little bit of time off. And yeah, 100%. I can imagine a lot of lifters, a lot of people who are training, listening would resonate with that. And I think as well, it's good to distinguish between, yeah, sometimes, if you're in the early stages, sometimes just going to the gym, you're actually going to feel better for it. Whereas actually when you're a little bit further down that line, absolutely, because ultimately, a little bit like going right back to the beginning, what we spoke about, it's just going to hinder that progress. It's not going to, you're not going to be able to reach those potentials that we're going for. And with the training side of things, everything that we've touched on there, and I know we haven't really dove into the training side of things, but everything outside of that impacts the training that we do, which I think sometimes, yes, I'm all for working hard. I'm all for putting the effort in. However, there's that's just sort of like the tip of the iceberg, if you like, which I think a lot of people can sometimes. I don't think people forget. I just think sometimes it's a case of, again, you hit the nail on the head. A lot of people have got a lot of things going on, and when there's a lot of plates spinning, maybe the easiest thing to focus on is the training rather than the other things. Would you agree, or what are your thoughts?
Yeah, because the training side of things is naturally encapsulated away from everything else. You only do training when you're in the gym. It is a place you go. It is a thing that you do for a dedicated period of time. It's not like all of the other things during your normal daily life where you're doing it constantly, or it's something you return to here, there, and everywhere. It's like eating your meals at the correct times. You're having to return to that between 3 and 6 times a day, right? You're going to train. You're not going to do like 3 sets here, show up again in another 2 or 3 hours from then, do another 2 or 3 sets there. Like, so, it's all encapsulated within one thing. It's just one period of time that you dedicate for that exact thing. And for us to do it properly, you have to cut out everything else. And because of that, it does have its own little spot where people can just focus solely on that while they just drown out everything else that happens for the rest of their days, which ends up being kind of the purpose of it, partially. But then also, if it's turned in the direction towards you use it as your safe place to be because everything else is shit, you're in trouble. Because very soon, that one place that you have solace will then become shit as well. And so it's a limited hangout in a way. You only have that place and time for a short while before it starts to go bad. But if you take care of everything else and it's still a little bit of a place that you can retreat from everything that you do on a normal daily basis, it stays a happy place that you could be. Up until the point that, like I said, you push the training side of things so far that at some point you're going to start feeling the creaks. You'll be like, okay, all right, that's fine. I'll have to pull back. But at the very least, when you pull back, it's not like, Jesus Christ, thank the Lord, I am done with doing this for now. It's just like, darn, I have to stop.
Yeah,
I'll be back. Much better
absolutely.
outcome.
Absolutely, just that sort of that reframe of it, because you all, we always talk about, log your workouts, track everything, whereas everything is to a certain extent, everything is trackable. You mentioned there about sleep, how are they feeling? There's, I mean, I couldn't even name you all the gadgets that you can use to track your sleep and all those sorts of things. Like there's everything out there, whereas it doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be over complicated. Really, you can put that in there. Quite a lot of topics and tangents thrown in from there. What we've chatted about, but the last question that I like to ask Nick is, from everything that we've chatted about there, and for everyone listening, what would be your take home points or words of wisdom?
Okay. My biggest take home point, probably through the thrust of the information that we didn't really talk too much about the actual presentation material all that much, which
No,
is
I
it's totally good by me. That's not a problem at all. But I'll try and tie in that a little bit here, is that the biggest thing that anyone can take away from just going through this lifestyle overall is that you need to be guided a little bit more by what you're enjoying and how you're feeling rather than anything else, because at the end of the day, like, we're human beings that do this thing way before we are bodybuilders or powerlifters or strongmen or whatever. Like, we are people before we're athletes of any type. And if you're sacrificing your human capacity to feel normal enough that you can be happy with what you're doing, and you're just sacrificing everything to the goal of being the athlete first, you're going to run into problems that will end up biting you back and stopping you from being that athlete that you were setting out to be in the first place. Everything comes with a cost because we're not superhumans. No matter what tools and gadgets or PEDs or whatever we have access to, or even if you're a genetic elite and you have all of that plus all of the gadgets and tools and help and coaching and all the rest of it, we're all still humans first. And if you're not focusing on those little things, like we talked about mostly, is lifestyle. If you're not taking care of the lifestyle stuff, which is how you spend the majority of your entire life, then the thing that you do that you're trying to quote unquote like live for is going to become empty to you at some point. And it's not going to be an overnight switch for you where you realize that it's like, oh, okay, well, I don't enjoy this anymore because everything sucks. But you're going to have that little domino effect starting at one thing, that maybe one thing you sacrificed for you to do a little bit more of another. then took away enough and enough. And over time, little subtractions or additions by subtraction will end up taking away your enjoyment of the thing because you can't perform it, you can't recover it, you mentally can't perform there, you can't be there in the same mind state that gave you the enjoyment in the first place. You start to realize that it's more externally validating at some point rather than internally once you get to that point. And then you start to question exactly the reason why you're doing it in the first place, when the original reason was because you loved it, and you no longer will once you hit that point. That is the existential red line, not just the training red line. And that happens to a lot of people. And that's usually what ends up ending people's careers as an athlete. They take on way too many things, too many irons in the fire, too many plates spinning in the air, and they just keep doing it because things are moving right. And they're like, okay, well, I can be a high performing human and do all this. And it lasts for a while, and they may get wildly successful for a period of time. But then you hear all the rest of the tropes that come out is that you don't get that kind of fulfillment from being successful. You don't get that fulfillment from the money or the accolades or the recognition or this, that, the other that you may get from what you're doing, no matter how big or small it might be, because it ends up becoming empty if you don't feel it anymore and you don't feel like you're performing for yourself or showing up for yourself in your normal daily life anymore. And it's just in sacrifice to the thing that you said was important, but now you resent. So for anybody that is going down the path and they're the hard-nosed, hard-headed, just do anything to get there, second guess that a little bit, just to know, don't take away any of your motivation, but turn that not only towards one thing, turn it towards being the human being at the best way that you possibly can to show up for yourself first, and then allow everything to follow suit. Because if you don't do that, you're going to deplete your resources at some point.
I think that was a good wrap up, and then some takeaway points from there. And I know originally when I reached out for to set up the podcast to speak about the electric, said it at the start. However, a typical strength chat episode, we kind of like went with the conversation a little bit there, but I think there was a lot of useful tips and a lot of useful information there, because I know for the training side of things, like what we've touched on, there's a lot of information there. Whereas I think where people can really see that progress is exactly like what you said, those lifestyle options there. So we'll have to do another episode to actually talk about the original topics that I mentioned. But really appreciate you taking the time to just jump on, Nick. Like I say, I think there was a lot of useful practical takeaways from there. If anyone has any questions about what we've chatted about today, reach out to you, the services you provide, the content that you put out there, your podcast. Where can people reach out to you and find you?
So people can find me at the central hub of Instagram, is really where you can find everything else. So my Instagram is just my name. It's just Nick Gloff. So you can search me. You'll find me pretty easily, I would imagine. Then everything that I have to offer, education wise, I put up a fair amount of stuff onto Instagram. And then I have a YouTube channel that you can find through the link in my bio that also leads you to all the rest of the discount codes and other links to find other things. So the YouTube channel is there. The podcast is there and all the places that you can go find it. That is the Going Deep podcast that I do with a good friend of mine, Matt Berzicott, and also more recently, Tavish Steele, who is a good friend of both of ours, that is sitting on as our young Jamie and Rogan terms. So you can find all of that stuff there. And then also my website is teamgloff.com. And you can find that also through the link in my bio on Instagram. So everything is there. Soon to come is some apparel that'll also be there for representing Team Gloff if anyone's interested in that. So that'll go live for pre-order fairly soon. And then I will also have some bigger projects that'll be showing up directly on the website that I'm not going to talk too much about just yet. That will be showing up pretty soon that I think people will be pretty excited about. So keep your eyes open. If you're interested in anything that I do, I'll be around.
Nice, a nice little teaser there. But no, thanks a lot for taking the time to jump on, Nick. Thanks a lot to everyone listening, and I will see you all next week.